Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Myth, Magic, and Movies, where we look at the Gothic elements in film and television. Today, I have two wonderful guests here. I've got Christian Steadfast Lov, who's a music producer and Harry Potter aficionado, and Bradley Smith, who is a vampire and horror nerd and an expert on the Rings of Power and all the lore of Tolkien. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. We are growing our audience slowly but surely, so if we can keep up the momentum, that'd be greatly appreciated. And we're always producing more content on the channel. So if you really want to show your support for the movie Pope, hit that subscribe button, join the Film Faithful. You may end up becoming a film bishop. It's one of the many perks. But guys, I just want to kick off our discussion today. So the title of this episode is Cosmic Jewelry, and I wanted to look at three particular items in pop culture: the Infinity Gauntlet and Infinity Stones, the Rings of Power, and the Deathly Hallows from Harry Potter. And the reason why I wanted to take a look at them, because each of these items holds a specific sway over the characters in their respective universes. So the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy do their best to try to capture or contain the power of the Infinity Stones so they don't fall into Thanos' hands. Harry Potter and his wizard friends do their best to try to get their hands on the Deathly Hallows so Voldemort doesn't become the overpowering sorcerer of the wizarding world. And the denizens of Middle-earth have to contend with Sauron's quest to obtain the One Ring and to disable the Rings of Power so he doesn't hold sway over Middle-earth. But it's one of those things where I kind of wonder sometimes, and I don't know if you guys have these thoughts in your private life. Which of these items would you want, and which of these items would you think kind of trump the other? So before we dive in, why don't you guys just go ahead and give a brief introductions to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourselves. Either one of you can start.
Okay, Brad.
So we were talking a little bit before this about a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. You know, I feel like I'm just the right age that when I was growing up, the Harry Potter books were still coming out. They were still being written. Mm-hmm. So people were going crazy about those. I remember reading them as they came out, watching the movies as they came out. At that point, Lord of the Rings had been written for a pretty good while. Mm-hmm. But I very distinctly remember when the movies came out and people were just going crazy about how long they were. So that was a very big part of my life growing up. I've been a Lord of the Rings fan since I was very, very small. I think probably of like all the fandoms I'm a part of, that it's like one of those I will never let go of. Star Wars is the one I've had the longest. Right after it is Lord of the Rings. And then, yeah, you know, I also grew up with not the MCU, but like when the X-Men movies were coming out and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies were coming out. So when the MCU started, just started watching that too. So like all the universes that we're talking about are ones that I have been a part of, fan of pretty much since they started. So when you sent these three items, I'm like, this is good. I will say the ones for Harry Potter, I'm like, ugh, I haven't read those books in a hot minute.
Well, that's why we've got Christian here. Christian, you're would you consider yourself an aficionado or an expert in the Potterverse?
Oh yeah, no, I would date them. Like if they were available in character, I'd be like, let's go out of the town together. Any one of you. Like I'm open. Guy, girl, car, like all the stuff that's crazy out there. There's just what a world, right? What a great fantasy world that she put together. And I've always been a fan of magic to the level of like miraculous, not the level of showcasing a trick in front of somebody, but the realness in fantasy of magic. Right? That to me has always been the lure. Wow, like there's like this unbelievable thing, this level that doesn't end, but then there's also these limitations in it. And it to me, it's like I like meticulous, I like detail, I'm like an engineer in thought. So how far can this magic go where it stops? Which one's more powerful? Why is that wand more powerful than that wand? Why in his hand and compared to their hand? It's like there's so many different factors. The complexity of Harry Potter and the world of Harry Potter, I love it. But the simplicity of it too, it's a child's story. She built it for children. But yet me, 20 years ago and now can still look at it with this childlike feeling and still analyze it like an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So again, and as he said, Tolkien for me when I was young was intellectual. right? That's a big book. You read that whole book? That's what I say to my best friend. That whole book? He's like, yeah. I'm like, all of it? And like, there's another one? It's like, holy smokes. And so I got a lot of my Tolkien and that life through someone else, but someone who could explain the things to me where I couldn't really comprehend it intellectually at the time. And it built intellectual thought for me, prepared me for Harry Potter, and as well as, which my favorite, I love Marvel. I love Superhuman. My brother used to be a comic book fan. Now I love the art. I love the character. So I'm an artist. You said before I'm a musician. That's just an art that I found that I could kind of run with, that I found capabilities within myself, right? But I also do film. I'm an actor. I like to direct. I like to do sound. I design clothing. So in my background here, I have my own clothing line. I don't know if it can be seen. And I'm working on some of the other things. But really, like film and this fantasy, I'm writing. I'm an author now. So my next level is actually going into fantasy. And so my reason here with what we're doing here is I think it's going to expand not only my opportunities, but also what you do here with the
Yeah.
people that I'm going to be infiltrating into, because I'm going after people, in different industries. But this
Yeah.
book here is going to be mystery and fantasy. Think of Harry Potter meets Detective Sherlock Holmes, right? And and I want to make it more realistic, less fantasy. So that's the level that I'm trying to go to. So that's why I love this stuff, because when I write notes, I really want to understand some of this stuff and the lure behind it. Because there's, like I said to you, the original version, the scripted version, then the production version of the original idea. So how many Marvel movies have we seen, guys? How many times have that shit got watered down, excuse my language, along the lines where I'm like, Marvel, cut it out. Don't do that. Don't put that one out, right? But that's just the level of what happens over time. So, I love that we go back and look at this, because we're looking at all the factors, the original ones and some of the new stuff. So yeah, I'll let you run with it.
Yeah, I was gonna say I should introduce you to my friend Matt, because he runs he's a fantasy writer himself, and he's got like a publishing company, so I can definitely hook you two up.
That'd be great.
We actually did an episode that's going to air later this month about tragic heroes in Greek mythology. So I think you guys would definitely love that.
I love Greek mythology.
Yeah,
that's where all these superheroes come from, man. That's where all these ideas come from. It was another, it's just crazy. Like a lot of our superheroes and stuff build from that Greek mythology.
Exactly. I mean, what they're doing now is pretty much a continuation of what they've been doing for thousands of years in Mesopotamia, Greece, and Rome. So, Christian, you did touch on a very interesting point about determining the limitations of magic, and it does lead us into the opening talking points. What I find so fascinating is that with these items of I'm going to use jewelry just as a catch-all term, but what I find so fascinating is the fact that you have almost limitless power contained within these tiny objects.
Almost.
And it's just so fascinating. So I just want to open the floor out. I mean, what is it about these items, whether it's the Infinity Gauntlet, the Rings of Power, the Deathly Hallows, that is just so fascinating to you guys? I mean, either one of you can start us off with that, because it's because whether we've seen it, on screen with the Avengers going back in time and gathering it, or Harry and his friends trying to find the Horcruxes, or Celebrimbor being seduced by Sauron to try to create the rings, and then they're being dispersed among elves, dwarves, and men. There's something about them that just catches our imagination, and we want to be with the characters, because we want to know what is so important, what is so fascinating about this seemingly insignificant item that just draws out all a full spectrum of human emotions, or I should say emotions, because some of the characters aren't human. But what is it about these items that just draws out so many different ranges of emotions, all at once? I mean, either one of you can lead us off on that.
Always you, Brad. You go.
Alphabetical order, Bradley.
That's a lot of talking points at once. One thing I've always thought is fascinating, particularly about this list, is the fact that every item that you listed is pretty small. The biggest one is the gauntlet with the stones in it, but then the gauntlet itself harnesses the power of the stones. So the stones are really where the power is coming from, and then is able to harness that power. The rings are very small. The hallows are very small. When we think of magical items, you typically tend to think of jewelry or maybe a crest, and then even way back in ye olden days, you think of like magical stones and gems and things that hold power. They're almost always very small things, very concentrated devices. And it's an interesting point when you said that there is almost limited power. One thing that I have seen and heard people talk about consistently when you have the idea of magic and these powers is you need rules. You need to have limitations of some kind. Otherwise, it's just, cheat mode when you put on this ring or when you do this one particular thing. I play D&D a lot, and that's one thing I really like about there's balance written into almost everything that is there. I've heard a lot of people who work in fantasy work in things where you're dealing with supernatural, where you're dealing with something that is extraordinary. There is always that limitation that's given to it. One thing I will say for some of the items we're going to talk about is that some of them have limitations, but the limitations are so extreme that the power level you get through this, I mean, the fact that Thanos snaps and wipes out half of everything, that is unbelievably powerful. For some of the hallows, the ability to conquer death itself, that's pretty freaking up there. But then at the same point in time, some of the items that we're going to talk about have powers that are a little question mark, because whoever, like some of the rings, there are a lot of rings in the Tolkien universe that we're going to talk about, magic rings. Some of them go extreme as like the one ring and all the abilities that it has, down to some of the rings that some of the dwarf lords have, that when you look it up, some people are like, what do these rings do? Question mark.
Yeah.
Because it's not. I also think there's something to be said about the ability that these items have, almost versus the ability of the person to harness the power that is there.
Right, like the Green Lantern rings, for instance.
Yeah. So like the idea that if Thanos having the Infinity Gauntlet versus when Hulk snapped the Infinity Gauntlet, they were able to do the same thing, but
Or
the
Iron
idea.
Man?
Do what?
Wasn't it Iron Man that snapped it the second time?
They both did. Hulk
Yeah,
snapped
yeah.
to bring
Okay.
everyone back, and then Iron
Yeah.
Man snapped to get rid of
Rocked
Thanos
it.
and all of his people. But yeah,
Oh, yeah,
that
okay,
is still
okay.
a good example, though. The idea
Yeah.
that even before he snapped, you could tell it was like having a big impact on him, and the idea of the ability or power level of the user could also determine what you're able to get out of the artifact itself. So even
Yeah.
though you might have this, it's weird. I almost think of it as like a video game about having a level 3 character and you get a magic item that's level 10. Like,
Right.
this thing is
prepared
really
for it.
cool, really powerful. You just can't use it yet, or you can't use it as well as you want to.
Or you can use it, but it might have detrimental effects.
Yeah.
Can I jump on that point of what you're saying too? It's not even just the user, it's also the creator. So when we talk about these limitations, the only limitation that we really can perceive into the magic is the intent into the magic when it's being created at the level it can go to. Some of these wizards I've seen and some of these things, they create something unknown, announced to them how actually powerful that thing is. And then, like you said, somebody else wielding it can show that than the actual creator. But there are also that side of it where no matter who's holding it, because of the original creation, the limitations are within the magic. So no matter who's having it, Thanos takes one of these things. It's like no matter how big and strong he is, it only can go so far. And so I think
we've seen the effects on Thanos after he uses the gauntlet as well.
Oh yeah, smoked. And again, think about the rings of power, right? Each one of these things kind of have a cost to them, right? None of them are just like kind of wheelie dealy free-handed. Like remember in Guardians of the Galaxy when they had the Power Stone, it was smoking them, but we didn't know at the time that he was a super god, right? A demigod or whatever, right? We were like, how is he not getting? Everybody's like, how is he not getting smoked? But it even took everybody else to get involved in that, to hold the harness that one rock. Right, where some of the other ones didn't do that. They could handle them and it wasn't a big deal, but that one had to be contained. The biggest thing also is not just those pieces of magic, but how the gauntlet you put those 4 stones in something else and that it doesn't harness it properly. You also have the proper catalyst to harness the power and potentially rise that power to bigger, like the 3 having all 3 Deathly Hallows together compared to having a separate piece. You're way more powerful if you got all 3. That it only really does the job he was speaking about, living to its potential when all 3 of them were together, as well as the power of the rings, right? So when the rings start getting dispersed, the power in Sauron went away for him. Like when he was losing power of the rings, like they were dying, it was getting dispersed, they were getting lost. I don't think Sauron really had the same kind of power. The cost to the rings, he got back. The more these guys, the greed that came with the dwarves, because I read up on each one of these, the elves had kind of separate, they had air, water, fire, and air rings, right? So they had the elements. And then you have men who really, I think it was the power of all 9 rings ruling is what gave Sauron the power. When those kings started dying out, I said, so did some of the power that Sauron had, right?
Yeah.
So again, I say, I interject because it's not just the power of one. Each one of these are about the combinations, right? Combination of 9, combination of 3, combination of 19. Was that 19 rings altogether? Then the 1. So, and the same with the 3 Deathly Hallows. Yeah, it says 19 rings of power and then the 1. Holy smokes, right? And all of it came from the intent of one. That's why he had the power. He was the creator. But it doesn't make sense. Like you said, we go to the dwarves, like, what the hell does this even do? If you really look into it, what they talked about was it gave them wealth. Greed, though, was the hard part to them. And that's why they all hid in the mountains and put all their gold in the mountains the way they did. And we got Smog later on, right? That line of movies that came, which I think were some of my favorite, the Battle of 5 Armies. Is that correct? Right? That was awesome. It wasn't the original Hobbit and the Tolkien I really grew up and loved, but it was something that grew over time. And then the storyline like this made more sense later. Oh, that's where all the damn dwarves went. But they all died in their own greed, right? And then you had what? All these 5 or 6 different dwarves that were left that finally got all that money back and it meant nothing. There was really no power in it. It was all the power was gone. So again, all I'm saying is it's not just the individual, it's the creation of the potential of the holder, but also the combination in what we're talking about here, the combination of these together that amplify the power of each source. So that's what's cool to me. Alone, they're great. I mean, I'll take any one of the stones alone. There's not one in here I'm like, oh no, I couldn't do anything with that. Time would be great though, because you got time like they did. You can basically get all the other stones over time. If you you can manipulate that. But you start with another one, maybe reality, get the reality stone. Just in your reality, you have all stones in your hand now. And now that's the reality of the circumstance, right? So there's so much power to each one of these pieces. It really is. It's hard to contain in my mind sometimes the combinations of each one of these as they grow and as they combine together. Imagine having all 20 rings.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah. Imagine if from that point now you're going to distribute them out again, right? You're the one, and now you have the power of the 19 rings, and you're going to distribute them how you will. I mean, you're going to own Middle Earth.
For within these rings was bound the strength and will to govern each race. But they were all of them deceived.
That's what, didn't he? I mean, wasn't that the deal for a while? There was wars, but he was pretty much the darkness and the power in Middle Earth for a while. The main power, correct? At some parts of the storyline. Am I wrong about that? Has he always been trying to? Was there one point where
I was going to say,
I
would say he's always been trying to.
Okay.
Yeah,
he never really obtained it.
He had the power, but that story is a little, the goodness of people will always rise up. So
sure,
I don't think he was never like the definitive leader. There were always people rising up against him until they finally were able to defeat him. But like
Rise of the Kings or whatever it was.
Yeah, so when Isildur took the ring from him, that was the first big, well, not the first defeat, for him. In the story of Lord of the Rings, that was the big defeat for him, where they were like, okay, he's done with. But even then, really, his essence goes back to Mount Doom and still just builds power, builds power, builds power. So it's kind of like one of those, he constantly tried to take over, and up until the end of Lord of the Rings, just never succeeded. But he was definitely the powerful dark force in Middle Earth for God knows how long. So,
Yeah,
It's funny though, the plan
yeah,
didn't
'cause-
work.
yeah.
Well, that's another thing too, is because I mean, it's because Thanos was still pretty powerful even without the Gauntlet, and Sauron was still a threat even though he didn't have the one ring on him.
Yeah.
And Voldemort was still a threat even without the Deathly Hallows. So it just goes to show that these items aren't necessarily the source of their powers, but they sort of either they amplify and they channel the will of whoever has control of.
How similar are those three characters you just talked about,
Yeah.
though, in the sense of different movies and different worlds being very much the same style of villain, in the
Mhm.
sense of like you just said, always trying, think about it. In the Deathly Hollows, he wanted to just take over and kill all the muggles and it be a dark world, right?
Mhm.
Sauron wanted to just kill everything in a sense and make it dark. Like they talk about darkness a lot, right? And
Yeah.
then also in in
The
with
MCU.
Thanos,
Yeah.
Thanos side of it, I mean, he literally he wanted to control population, like just it's kind of dark, right? Murder people. Each one of these characters, even they're very different in the essence of what their character is, they're still kind of going after the same and representing the same thing, which is kind of dark, right? And then the opposite of that is the light side of it, right? That you get the characters who are the heroes, they're trying to wield this thing not to control, but to protect.
Right. It's literally a battle of over life and death. And Vision says something very interesting in Age of Ultron, where where Captain America asks him, "Are you on our side?" And Vision says, "I'm not on anyone's side. I'm on the side of life." And that's what you see, whether you're with the Fellowship of the Rings or Hogwarts or the Avengers. They're always fighting on the side of life, because the intent of the villain who is after these items is death, like you
Yeah.
said, Christian, because their main intention is control, and if control means bringing about death to achieve that goal, then so be it. Whereas the heroes are very much on the side of we've got to stop them at any cost, but we can't really stoop to their level, to go with that
But they're
cliche.
so different too. If you think about like how frail Voldemort kind of is in the sense of everything and the dying, then you have Thanos, who is like, nobody's going hand in hand with Thanos. Like that dude is a beast, right? And
Mhm.
I love that, even when he's battle gear. And then you got Sauron, who is kind of that same thing, was a battle guy, but now he's in his essence and he's healing and repairing. They're all just this kind of separate but same, right? Like it's so weird when you put yourself into a universe, because you kind of have to separate yourself from other universes. So when we
Mhm.
sit here and try to contrast, you can contrast, but sometimes you can't compare,
Yeah.
because when you put yourself in that universe, Marvel universe, you really can't think Deathly Hallows. The
Right.
magic's not the same, right? So yeah, I love this because the complexity of trying to compare and contrast magic levels and how powerful something might be. If the rings were in the DC universe, I don't think they do much in compared to the stuff that's already in the somebody would just long arm him from a long distance away and just punch his face off. You got the
Mhm.
final Fantastic Four and type, just random DC or Marvel stuff. But when you try to compare it, what I like is we kind of shift each one to fit a little bit more into the other. Like, like if say magic levels 8 and 1, the other one's kind of 5, we kind of find a happy medium to make them cohesive, like a little bit more cohesion. So if I was like all three of these universes were all melded together, how would they interact with each other? How would a wand interact with somebody's magic superhero ability
Right.
compared to
So would a wand have the same effect as as if Doctor Strange was wielding it like Harry Potter was wielding it?
yeah, because you have nothing going on in Middle Earth in that way. Nobody's like, waving a wand. It's kind of more this like more human-esque, hopeful stuff that happens. Nothing really magical per se. I think remember they were healing the forest and stuff, right? a lot of incantations and spells. It was like very intentful. It wasn't just like this happens and it happens. It was like the intent of the person, not like where magic Harry can say 3 words and it just happens. Right? It's like at that level. So yeah, it's tough to try to compare these levels of magics to each other because of the difference of the universes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even in the Marvel universe, because I was a huge comic book nerd back in the day. I mean, even in different universes, you know, the Infinity Gauntlet in one universe wouldn't necessarily work in another timeline. So
yeah, maybe wouldn't do the same thing. Like
right,
Harry
exactly.
Potter.
Exactly. So I actually want to start off with the Infinity Gauntlet, and Christian, you kind of did lead us off on that. So with the Infinity Gauntlet, it's obviously it's an important item. It's an item that Thanos pretty much spends most of the Infinity Saga trying to obtain, and then the Avengers trying to reverse his effects. So I do want to start off by saying that out of all of these items, I think it's the Infinity Gauntlet is probably the most complex, in my opinion. Because you have these 6 different items that are very powerful on their own, but when you assemble them into into that gauntlet, all of a sudden it becomes like the super weapon that is very much dependent on the will of whoever's using it, whether it's destruction, via Thanos, or if it's restoring life, like with Hulk and Iron Man. So I want to start off just by asking, when you guys look at the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity Stones, is there anything about these items that kind of stand out to you that just makes you think, how is it that these items are just so powerful, and yet at the same time they're just so small and elusive and insignificant in appearance?
Well, I think one thing that's very interesting to me about the Infinity Gems is the fact that when we see the Infinity Gems in the MCU, for the first time, none of them are just there. They are all of them in something. It's like Loki's staff in the Tesseract.
Oh yeah,
the Ether.
yeah.
They're all. It's like
contained.
there has to be something there to contain the power, because we've seen when someone touches the Power Stone, you see what happens.
Right.
Yeah, and then in Guardians, it's very interesting when the Destroyer gets it, he grabs it and immediately has the reaction that everyone else has, that it starts to like destroy his body, and he takes his hammer and boom. Now this is a super weapon, and because I'm not touching it, I just defeated the blowing up rule of touching the Power Stone.
Right.
The Soul Stone is the only one that I think when we see it, we don't know if it's necessarily encased in anything, because we don't see it until after they obtain it, and they're literally just sitting there holding it. But every other Infinity Stone is encased in something. It's like the relic has the stone in it, and that gets the power. But then when you pull it out of there, you see the real destructive power that these stones have.
I say volatile. Is that a good word for it, you think?
Yeah.
And I think the soul stone, I think because of the sacrifice, that when it gets released to us, in a sense, what happened, right? Got released. It was like the volatility was taken. The life was taken from it. It was contained from that person's sacrifice or whatever, right? Where all the other ones, so you said destructive, super just volatile. The time stone is contained, but I don't think we see that much we don't see volatility with that one.
It's contained in the Eye of Agamotto.
I was going to say, we also don't,
it though, right?
He doesn't physically touch it either.
Yeah.
Even when he pulls it out, he's holding it.
Nobody does?
I think when it goes to Thanos, he might touch it and then put it in, or it might just go straight into the gauntlet. Because I remember he's holding the gauntlet out. I can't remember if he takes it and puts it in, or if it just goes in.
And also in the past, when Hulk went as Bruce to go get the time stone from the original holder before Doctor Strange, remember the lady that trained him?
Yeah, the ancient one, yeah.
I think she put it in his hand. Because she took it out and gave it to him at the end. I'm pretty sure they showed us her giving it to him. I don't remember if he handled it, but she didn't give him the holder.
Yeah, that's true. She might have.
So yeah, I'm trying to think again some of these little moments or whatever. But
I think, but to your point, I think the volatility kind of depends on the power that these stones project. Because I think with time itself, it's not as the implications of its volatility aren't as aren't as destructive as, say, something like, the Power Stone, where if you touch it, you're gonna be turned into crispy bacon.
And see, really, the Power Stone is the one that we see every single time someone touches it, is where that volatility comes out. Even when Thanos pulls it from the Gauntlet to just bitch slap Captain Marvel with it, he doesn't have like the effect that he doesn't start like melting, but you can tell he has a moment of like, wow, this hurts.
You see him kind of strain into it, like but
it also depends on the constitution of the person holding it, because if it's a mere human, to your point, Christian, from earlier, if it's a mere human touching it, I think it's safe to say humans aren't as resilient as, say, a Titan.
Fragility is the word I use.
Yeah,
fragility, right? Because that's what I'm saying. It's different. Voldemort holding a stone compared to Thanos holding the stone, right? Voldemort's smoked. He's just going to turn back into a puddle of whatever he was when he came out of the Horcrux, right?
Yeah.
But again, Thanos is like he's not worldly. He's universal.
Yeah.
Universal strength. He's like, I don't know if we can say it, but I say he's kind of like the strongest physical leader representing in Marvel, per se, universal. Can you think of another one outside of like Zeus? Or what? Not Zeus. Thor's his father would be, Odin. I think Odin would be kind of the bigger, even though Thor is strong. Odin's kind of the power source of a leader. He's a leader. Thor wasn't really much of a leader. He was given the hammer. He was,
Well, keep in mind too, Thanos pretty much made short work of the Asgardians at the beginning of Infinity War.
Yeah, it's terrible to think that Thor couldn't have been one of the ones to handle some of this stuff along the way, that Hulk was the one, and that evidently we had to kill Iron Man to get what was necessary done. That was sad.
Yeah.
And again, we don't really have moments like that in Marvel. They don't typically take heroes out of the game for us with these things. That's why it's so funny. Everybody came back after everybody died, in a sense, right? They always kind of give you a happier ending. And that was not happy. That was rough.
Right.
But then you also have this like Iron Man sacrifice that everybody thought he was a self-absorbed, type of egomaniac, and then you realize he actually cared about humanity and was willing to sacrifice himself. That's really the whole time. So he died not, I don't know, it's like a martyr, but he died in a sense where like there was something more to it. There was emotion of losing him, but it was right for the storyline because it taught us something about ourselves. I think these powers we all can obtain to a sense in reality, but in the universe, they're like way out of control for regular people. We're just like looking at these magical things happening around us. Imagine us in a universe of Marvel watching Superman fly in front of us, and that's a normal thing. And then then you see like a Green Lantern driving on a green motorcycle by us, that he creates. It's like zoom zoom, all these superheroes. If that was normal, then none of this would really intrigue us. Well, because it's unobtainable and because it's not real is why it's so cool to embrace it as something imaginary that's real for you. And that's why I love every one of these stones. If I place myself in the teleporting stone, what would I do with that? How would that change my life in reality of the world? I know out of all these stones that are here, like I think I said to you earlier, I really do think the reality stone to me is the most powerful one that would, because that's all that matters. I mean, at the end of the day, who cares what that guy thinks about life? I only have one line of thought, and that's my perception. And if I can control everything within my perception, who cares about anything else? That guy's not powerful anymore. Boom. That's my reality. That's what happens in my reality. You could literally take the stone out of that guy's hand and put it in your hand.
What's also interesting too is the fact that these items, the Infinity Gems themselves, they're not good or evil. It's dependent on whoever's using them.
Yeah, and Brad said it well.
Yeah, and I think out of all of the items, I think with the Infinity Stones and the Infinity Gauntlet, we get to see how it's used both, on the dark side and the light side. because Thanos uses it to wipe out half of the universe, and Hulk and Iron Man use it to kind of restore everything back into balance. Although in Iron Man's case, he kind of did the reverse on Thanos. But
I was
Yeah,
gonna
they
say
were
literally
forced-
Hulk brought everyone back, and Iron Man's like, no, Uno reverse card. I'm getting rid of some of
But
those.
you
it's
gotta
like,
keep
sorry,
in mind,
Thanos.
they were forced to do that, though. They were forced. It wasn't so much like, hey, this is what I'm going to do with it. This is what I got to do with it. It's what really mattered to me is seeing these individual stones handled along the way and how they handle using them.
Mhm.
Some of those moments were sketchy, even for the heroes. Captain America and Iron Man and Hulk, they weren't agreeable to how some of these things were being used because each one of these things, again, the soul too, we killed one of our favorite people. I loved her. She was sexy. And she threw herself, they were fighting to kill themselves, to become a martyr. He had a family and all this other stuff, and that's why she did it. But I'm just saying, like, there's these pieces that come with the individual stones that really show the character of the characters.
Yeah.
When it came to the full part of it, again, showing the character of Iron Man, who he really was, that's another level of like, we know who Thanos. I actually, at one point, really felt for Thanos. I think they give you a little bit of taste of like his thought, and you get behind him and be like, he's really trying to help humanity in the sense of that's what his reality was. I need this power for them. And everybody looked at it like, you're a psychopath. What are you doing? What do you actually want here? He's like, it's not about me. It's about what this world needs.
Yeah.
And that creates a little bit of moral ambiguity too.
Whoa, holy!
When
At the
you
end,
look at
I'm like,
that, yeah.
don't kill him. I was sad when they came in and chopped his head off. Thor, you son of a bitch! We could have kept that guy. And again, that's the other part of it. You see the heroes have a villainous moment. That was very villainous of Thor to come in and chop his head off. That was vengeance, right? So again, the power, the wielder, but also the circumstances involved have a play in it as well, where I felt Thanos. When he snapped his fingers, I was mad, but at the same time, I also was like, well, why did you do that? And then I started digging into it and realized he actually had a heart about it, per se, in his warped perception of what he was doing for humanity. He really believed he was helping the world, the universe.
Right. And you can make the argument too that both sides were trying to achieve the good, but they're achieving it in their own way. Evil can be seen as good in one perception and vice versa. Bradley, did you have anything to add to that?
I mean, to both of your points, one thing everyone always says that villains don't think they're villains. To the villain's point of view, they're the hero.
Yeah, they have intent.
Yeah. And then one thing for Thanos is they even show you in Endgame, we pick up with story 5 years down the road, and we see that there are people who are struggling to move on. They lost people. They're trying to get their lives back. But you see from the environmental side that they're talking about, hey, I think he saw like whales in the Hudson. He's like, yeah, less boats, less pollution, less. You see that
the world's
for better or worse, Thanos had a kind of positive effect on people. So yeah, there definitely is a sense of, and even before when I was talking about the artifacts of the stones, we see people are doing things with the artifact in Thor: The Dark World. The elf guy whose name I'm forgetting right now,
Malekith.
Oh yeah, I was like, I know one of you guys is gonna know it. He wanted the ether to do something with the ether. The Mind Stone was used to create mutants. The Tesseract was going to be used as a power source. Like even without the stone being the stone, when it was still in the artifact, these things still had incredible power that people were still harnessing to do all sorts of different things. And then once you put all of that together in the Infinity Gauntlet, yeah, you can do something as simple as snap your fingers and wipe out half of all life in the universe.
Right.
So it is, I do really like that with the MCU, we got to see the stones, the artifacts, we got to kind of build slowly as we went, so that then by the time he came out and he had that gauntlet, and when he first shows up and he's already got a stone in the gauntlet, you're like, wow, this is the real fucking deal, man. This is like the real thing.
This is happening.
Yeah, and the fact that he punks out Thor like it's nothing, beats the Hulk in hand-to-hand combat in the beginning of the movie. You're like, like you were saying earlier, even without the gauntlet, this dude is a serious freaking threat. And then you just see him get more and more powerful, and it just feels like this inevitable snowball avalanche effect of he's just getting stronger as he goes, and he just keeps putting down one more hero after another, so that then by the time the movie ends, you're like, who's gonna stop this guy? And then Thor shows up and you're like, maybe, and then he snaps anyway, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So close.
Wah, wah.
Oh, so close.
Yeah, it was a nice try.
But I was gonna say, because out of all the villains here, I think with Thanos, we're conditioned to view Thanos as the villain because of what he did.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's not really, Christian, to your point, he's not doing it for himself. I mean, we see it at the beginning of Endgame. He's not sitting on a throne of skulls lording over everybody. He's living a simple
he's
life.
working. He's
Yeah,
working.
he's a farmer. Yeah.
Well, there is the scene where he's on, I think when he's on Titan, and he uses the Reality Stone to show, and he goes into like a bit of his backstory about this is what it was like. And we knew we were running out of time. We knew we were running out of resources. I told them a way to solve it, and they called me mad, the Mad Titan. They said, and then, spoiler alert, everything I said that was going to happen freaking happened.
Mhm.
And now you see what this world looks like. Like, I don't just think I'm right. I know I'm right.
We're the threat is what he said.
Yeah.
We're the threat, right? You're telling me I'm the threat. I'm telling you, you all are the threat. But nobody, again, crazy. A lot of villains are called crazy and insane, but until you hear backstory, until you have conceptual origin story, you're not emotionally attached to them, so you can't really understand. So they just look dark.
Yeah.
Right. There's even light behind the dark. Like even Voldemort. He was an orphan and just terrible life bringing up. And then he gets this awesome opportunity, but that trauma still played into the role because the power that he got, the darkness grows with power. The more darkness at the seat of the origin, the tougher it is to fight into the light in the darkness, right? So they say, well, why is he so evil? He was such a decent kid or this or that. Like Thanos probably wasn't a bad kid, wasn't going around just killing people at 10 years old or whatever. It was more of the trauma of gaining power and seeing things that he saw as a kid. Again, what they say, the power can either be something that builds or destroys someone, depending on who, because of their character is usually the word they use, right? Like integrity, And I'll say this about Thanos. When he said he was going to do something, he followed through. So again, now I kind of get beat up sometimes because I can be the devil's advocate, but if you told me to pick a side and I'm in that world and I'm walking with it, and there's Thor and there's Iron Man and there's Captain America acting like a bunch of bitches, I most likely would have been on the side of Thanos in the sense of I might not agree with what he's doing, but I understand the outcome of why.
Yeah.
And even though it's kind of like the Star Wars thing, because you said you're a Star Wars fan, right? It's like running with Darth Vader, and you're part of it, and you're looking like a villain from everybody. But when you're on the inside of it, that's just the guy that you're following, and you're just doing what's necessary in his picture, what he told you is going to be when he's done doing it.
I mean, there was order in the galaxy, so I mean,
again, yes, because of fear. It was fear. That's the difference between the darkness and the light. Is fear and love. Love is harder to control. Fear is not hard to control. That's why Sauron, and that's why the Dark Lord, and that's why they were able to control, because of fear. The Dark Lord was all about fear. Don't say his name. Don't say his name. Harry's like, Voldemort? Oh my God. Everybody's freaking out. He's like, but I'm Harry fucking Potter. I can say Voldemort if anybody can, right? And so, it's one of these things where I felt for Voldemort when they started showing his backstory. He was a curious wizard, and he had a lot of darkness, and he just wanted to build the power. I don't feel he had bad intent as a teenager trying to find these things out. He was just self-preservation. Oh, Horcrux, you say? Oh, I can hide myself. If something happens to this body, I still have other parts of me that would still live on, right?
Yeah.
Trauma, right? Darkness. And it grew as time grew. So, and that's not even with the magic part of it. I'm trying to build the person part of it into the magic part of it, because I think darkness has a different kind of power than the light. Like again, I'm always going to use Star Wars because I think that's a clean line between darkness and light. And the way, imagine Darth Vader never going to the dark and staying a Jedi, trajectory of that whole universe would be completely different.
Yep.
The Jedis wouldn't have got smoked, and there would have been way more Jedi power, and the Force would have been different than the darkness that was growing and way more powerful in the sense of the Jedis being able to balance that. They talk about balance all the time in that, right?
Yep.
The balance of the Force, right? And that's what they're talking about, the balance of the dark intent compared to the Jedi light intent. And I don't want to say hurting, but that is kind of a word, is they kind of do hurt people. Voldemort hurt people. Thanos killed them even, right? So on. There was no regard for human life. The only regard was more power.
Yeah.
Right. The
Literally,
ends
of them.
justify the means mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is also interesting. I've realized now in this conversation, didn't really put this into perspective before, but when we're talking about Thanos and then Voldemort and then Sauron, you've got someone who does not consider themselves a villain. Very much the end justifies the means. I am doing this for the good of everyone. So you've got this level of rationale behind it. Then you've got someone in the middle who was all about power and trying to live forever and get all this power. And it becomes to a point where, I mean, he is clearly the villain. He is willing to kill when it is necessary, sometimes maybe even when it's not. And then on the other end, you've got Sauron, who is literally evil personified, who is all about the pursuit of power and evil. I will dominate. His thing is all about domination. So I was like, even for like the levels of, if you're talking about the meter of like good person versus bad person or the rationales behind it, we had almost three very different levels of it. And I for some reason didn't really put that in perspective until this
That's
as well.
actually,
About
but that's a good point, because if you think about it, to Christian's point, we can definitely understand and in a weird way sympathize with what Thanos is doing.
yeah,
And and as much as we want to say, yeah, we're good people, we always like to look out for others. We're selfish. I mean, there's always going to be part of us that is going to see self-preservation first. I mean, if an airplane's going down, you're obviously going to put the mask on first before you help anybody else. With Sauron, and I think that's a wonderful transition, Brad. I think with Sauron, there's really no redeeming quality to him. He's just out there to try to control Middle Earth, because he's originally a follower of Morgoth. And then what ends up happening is Morgoth kind of gets shipped off to, I guess, whatever the Middle Earth version of Rikers Island is, and then he kind of takes over. Now this is more of your wheelhouse, Bradley, because you're very much so what I definitely want to Christian's going to be stepping out in a few minutes. So actually let's talk about the Deathly Hallows real quickly. Christian, let's
that's what I was about to say. I was like, let's do Deathly Hallows first.
Yeah, so
I don't know that one as well.
Yeah, so Christian, Christian, tell us a little bit about the Deathly Hallows, because we know we've got the Elder Wand, the Cloak of Invisibility, and the Resurrection Stone. Now with this one, I mean, the powers are pretty much singular, so it's very much what you get with the invisibility cloak is what you get. Same with the Resurrection Stone. What is it about them that's just so, I guess, so fascinating and powerful within the Potterverse?
Well, this is the other thing, right? Anything that's going to have a child story behind it, and the lore that goes over is going to leave curiosities to the power of it. Because think about, if you're telling a childhood story, say like a long book like Tom Sawyer. You ever see Huckleberry Finn? You get the shorter, smaller versions for the kids, right? They left so much out, because a kid's not going to read the full story that was originally. They need something to be broken down. So I think that's what we've gotten literally over the years of the stories of the Deathly Hallows. It became a childhood bedtime story to few.
Yeah, the tale of Beetle the Bard. Yeah,
to few, not to many. When I say few, because Ron knew about it. Hermione knew about it. Of course, Harry didn't, but there was other people that probably didn't know. That they weren't very much into that lore and that many years of which they came in later because their mom was a witch. Or just what I say is this, right? The power, we don't really get to understand it, even to the end of Deathly Hallows. Even after Voldemort used the wand and Dumbledore used the wand in front of us, even when Harry had the the cloak, it was kind of this commodity cloak. Oh, that's cool. He gets to walk around hallways and nobody sees him. That's cool. No, dude, that's so death doesn't see you. Do you have any idea how, like, he had no idea. What's this weird thing I put on me? He had no idea. We had no idea, right? This whole time. And then the other piece of it, you got so many magical things we've already seen happen that, like, they don't kind of really live up to the rest of the magic per se, as powerful as they talk about them. They don't really showcase them in way more powerful than other things we see other wizards are doing, right? Well, why are they more powerful? You're not showcasing anything that the invisibility cloak's doing that's this more powerful than something else. Think about how many trinkets and tokens of magic are in Harry Potter universe.
Right.
I mean, I can't even fathom. You walk into one witch's house that's, and we're like, we're looking around at every little weird thing they got going on around the house, because they're all, the pictures are moving, they're talking to us. There's an elf doing whatever. Literally, I guess those house elves can do whatever the hell they want to do, whenever the hell they want to do. So there's all these levels of magic that I still think there needs to be more on specifically the Deathly Hallows.
Yeah, because they're not fleshed out. Yeah, the stories aren't really fleshed out.
Series of origin stories, and I think they are doing it, like the original Elder Wand. We need to hit some of those little pieces they showed us in the Deathly Hallows way more intricately with storylines and character builds, and I think then we can maybe really understand, well, why are these three items being brought up over everything else in the universe in regards to magical power, when it's the most magical wand there is in the world. Well, show me that. Other than wait, what were the two wands that were fighting? Didn't Voldemort, he had the Elder Wand fighting Harry when it was cracking? Was that Harry?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, that doesn't seem super strong to me. Some kid who didn't even grow up in the magic world, even though he is powerful in the sense of his mom and dad. Well, why? Oh, okay, because you didn't control that wand. It was Snape's, and we didn't know that at the time. But again, we never really get to see the strength of the Deathly Hallows. It's just
it's just mentioned, but we really don't get the full context of it. So so the Deathly Hallows is probably one of those items where you kind of wish they would kind of flesh it out more like they did with the Infinity Stones or the Rings of Power.
She needs to write another series that basically is just about the Deathly Hallows, the origin of it, some storyline with it, some character development, and then tie it in as a prequel to the series. Because one thing I hate is when they do prequels and they're so off base. they don't line up with like any of the stuff that we know, and that's what happens. Like I said, sometimes when you get another company coming in, taking script and writing it the way they do outside of the original Rowlings. But I do love the Deathly Hallows. I find that the curiosity of each one of those pieces, I probably would be about it. Out of all these universes, that's the one I'd probably want to sit in.
The Potterverse.
Yeah, that's my home. Like I'll move into Universal Studios here in a couple years and just buy out Disney, one piece at a time. Because we have Marvel down there too. That's another thing, is they got Marvel down there, and that was really fun to experience. But Rings of Power, no Tolkien, nothing like that going on. That's another universe that I feel like maybe they haven't been able to understand the powers within it, because again, it's more realistic, more human, right? So just the Deathly Hallows side of it and the magic behind it and the unknown magic behind the most powerful tools, it's still ambiguous to me. Too ambiguous for me to really harness and comprehend those levels compared to the rest of the things in the universe. So yeah, they got some work to do, I think, to really get us to see that, well, why are these three things so worth living out over everything else? But it does represent something. And I think what it is what he said earlier. Brad hit it on the head. The immortality of you're cheating death. Why have any magic and power in anything if you're going to die in 70 years or less? Voldemort was drunk with immortality, drunk with it. And he was willing to do anything, literally anything, to keep building and protect himself, because that's all he cared about. That's why he wanted all 3 Deathly Hallows, not because of the power of them, but because of the opportunity of immortality, to be able to elongate the life with the power. The power without the longevity meant nothing to him.
Right. It was more for
Ooh.
selfish means. Yeah.
That's a good point.
I mean, well, also keep in mind too. I mean, as much as I'm annoyed by the fact that we don't know that much about the Deathly Hallows, at the same time I feel like the fact that we don't know too much about them kind of adds to the mystery of them. We don't know anything about them because there's no information on them.
That's the magic. Isn't that the whole thing we just talked about the magic realms? And that's why I love the Harry Potter, because the complexity of the spectrum of what one magic thing is and another magic thing, the levels could be so polar opposite, right? There's such a mysterious world to each one of these magical opportunities, where we can say in the Ring of Power, they kind of all hit a certain ceiling. As kind of the same in Marvel, everything kind of does get explained pretty well to understand each thing and the limitations of each thing, where you just don't get that in the universe of Harry Potter. It's so, what could this, again, like we just talked about, the wand in one person's hand over to the next person's hand, it doesn't have the same outcome or significance.
Yeah.
Right. And then again, keep in mind too, like, remember Harry and Voldemort both had the same core. They were like identical cores or something, like sibling cores. I can't remember the verbiage they used.
Yeah.
But that was like, he was like, oh, what if it could be this? And it's like, there's this other thing where it's like serendipitous. It's not like this. It seems like it was supposed to happen the way it was supposed to happen in Harry Potter, where like the storyline kind of like follows this line of like exactly as it's supposed to be, where that's not the case for Marvel. It's almost like we just expect the best good characters to win. We just expect it. At the end, the heroes are going to win, right? In Lord of the Rings, it's like you don't know what to expect. You don't know if the orcs are just going to kill everybody in this one, and then we're going to get a different series of things, or if the humans, we hope everybody wins. But a lot of people die that you were hoping aren't going to die, and things do happen. Very, very realistic. And the Harry Potter side of it, it's just not the case. It's just like, I have no idea where this is going to go.
But I think that
they do. But the story does. The storyline tells you where it's going to go.
Well, I was gonna say with the Deathly Hallows, I think is probably the most personal, because we all have a fear of death, because we all know at some point we are going to have to come to face with our own mortality.
Face it like Harry did. Remember?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a storyline. There's a reason. There's something. I'm saying there's something behind. It's already planned. They knew Harry was going to beat Voldemort. He was the hero, and he's like, I don't know who I am, and everybody's like, I know who you are. You're Harry Potter. He's like, what is that supposed to mean to me? But again, what I'm saying is, we knew at the beginning the end, but we didn't know how we were going to get there.
Right.
You don't get that with some of the other universes.
Right.
That's fair.
Right? Is Harry going to win in the end? We don't know that, but they keep telling us that's the case. We're all gunning for him.
It'd be real embarrassing if it's not.
Yeah, he did die. It was embarrassing. Remember the he was carrying Harry back after Voldemort
when Hagrid's
killed
carrying
him.
Harry's body back, everyone's like, "Oh man, we may have goofed on this one."
But on the wrong horse, right there.
Yeah, and again, that's just part of that. That's part of that universe.
But I mean, that's what I find so fascinating about the Deathly Hallows, is the fact that if given a chance, we would all like to use the invisibility cloak to hide from death. We would all love to have the resurrection stone. We would all love to have the Elder Wand, because sometimes we want to feel like we're invincible.
But would we handle it? Would we handle it? Would we wield it well? Would we be able to hold it from other people trying to get it from us? That's the real thing about the power. The power of those things are the people who want them. Those people are probably already powerful, more powerful than you. How the hell do you manage that? It's like having the football, right, kicked to you as a punter. There's 10 people coming after you. You just have to get away from those 10 people and hopefully end up somewhere where it's like a touchdown, right? You got to get by those people. That's how I feel like all those pieces are. If you get one, now you're the guy with the ball. and everybody's coming to tackle you. I
Right,
got
but
the Elder Wand.
right, but then you become paranoid because you don't know if you're going to be next.
So again, there's a cost to it. So you said it, everybody would want it, right? But they don't, once they get it, that's not the same. It's like the ring. I wish I had the ring of power. It's like, you do you? Did you not see the movie? See what happened to Frodo? That dude was wrecked, you know? So I'm saying, like, you can talk about wielding it, but at the same time, there's also not as much talk about the cost to wielding it. And that's what I love about Lord of the Rings, was the dark costs that come with the power was all over that storyline with Frodo and Sam. And also
the Nazgul.
yeah, that guy was just ruined. I mean, he turned into a goblin over time.
Yeah,
my
Gollum,
precious. That guy was rocked.
Don't forget the Witch King of Angmar. I mean,
yeah, I was like,
as being very
literally
powerful.
the 9 Nazgul were given their rings. They're like, this is great, and then they all got corrupted by the power of their rings, and now they're mindless husks of what they used to be. Yeah, Gollum just gets deformed and unable to die. Bilbo did pretty good until he lost the ring, and then we saw the age came and ran him over like a freaking school bus.
I thought he gave the ring away. He gave the ring to Frodo.
He did, but then the anti-aging thing wore off. So the next time we see him, you're like, wow, he's aged a lot.
Smoked, yeah.
I will say when you mentioned like if we had the power, would we use it? I'm not gonna lie. Earlier when you said, yeah, the teleport and the space stone, my first thought was, am I the only one that thought about how fast we would rob a bank? Like, am I like the only one that had that thought?
I feel like you don't even, but you think about that now, but when you're there, it's like you don't even care. Why would you care about money? Like I said, if I had the reality stone, my reality would not be thinking about how much money I needed, because whatever I needed,
material becomes immaterial at that point.
Yeah. And then think about that. If you could have anything you want all the time, and then you never really need anything, that probably would take a toll on you too, your human nature. It's like psychologically. And this is the thing that I say, people don't talk about the fragility. And this is why we need heroes. This is why we need stronger people than the fragility of us. And this is why we need people like Harry Potter who are willing to face death for the betterment of everybody else. Because it was like, he's going to kill everybody unless Harry goes like literally sits in front of a firing range. Could you imagine, like, not be put in front of a firing range, but having a door saying, could you just step out here for everybody else? We're going to shoot you. You're going to die, but you're going to help the other. If we shoot you, the next 5 people won't get shot. And you're looking back at the 5 people and they're all looking at you and the door's in front of you. That's a pretty rough decision to make. You only get one, right? You only really get one time. And Harry made it. And again, and Iron Man made it. And let me think, if is there somebody else in the Lord of the Rings type of thing that we'd see? You got muted, Luca.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, Frodo kind of makes that decision, doesn't he, Bradley?
Sure. Again, he was willing to go to Mount Doom knowing he wasn't going to come back. Exactly. So you hit it on the line. So this is the other part, like I said, the similarities of the villains, now the similarities of the heroes, even though they're all very different in the world. But yeah, they all literally were willing to sacrifice themselves, knowing that it wasn't just it was going to protect everybody else from that one bad entity every time. Right. And so, man, it's so crazy because we think about the vast part of it, but then we come back to these like straight 2 lines that are there in all of them.
Yeah.
The vast differences and the very similar pieces. So for me, I'm going to step out now and let you guys continue your convo. I think I got to say what I want to say. I think I hit most of my points.
Yeah.
And I look forward to doing this again with you guys. But I think you really hit something here with me that I have passion about. I don't know what it is about the fantasy and the magical world. Maybe because I was always meant to write and to be part of this in the script and be in movies and such. I still got a lot of years ahead of me, you know?
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I think you and Bradley should stay in touch because both of y'all, you guys are kind of running, along the same lines. So I would definitely, you guys have each other's emails, so definitely feel free to reach out to.
Yeah,
to
and we'll
each
be
other.
here too. We'll be doing this again. It looks like we have in a less than a week we have another episode.
February 22nd. That's when we'll be.
Oh, February
discussing
22nd.
vampires.
Okay, so next month. Yeah.
So
So
I was
again,
panicked when you said that. I was like, God, I thought that was next month.
oh yeah, no, I gotta move my dates now. So and I want to keep doing this. So I hopefully also we get to a point where maybe we can even have a bigger room and have a little bit more instead of all of us talking discussion, each one of us have a talking point that we get to talk about, and then we discuss, and the next person kind of has a talking point, and then we all discuss together. So then we're all getting around the circle, and it keeps growing. The more people we bring in, the more people that will come.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really appreciate this, man. Nice meeting you, Brad. Great conversations today. Great
You too.
topics, obviously, Luca. And, stay in touch.
Yep, absolutely. Take it easy, man.
I appreciate you guys. Be blessed.
Peace out, dude.
So wow, that was a lot of information on the Deathly Hallows, and I was gonna say, because the Deathly Hallows is one of those things that I don't really know that much about, because there isn't that much information about it.
Yeah, when we were talking about it, and just a few minutes ago, I was like, oh my god, that's right, the wand does break. It's like the invisibility cloak is the one that you see used so often because you get it so early. He gets it in, I think, the first movie.
Right, but we don't know what it actually is until later on.
Yeah, and then it's like when he was talking about the stone, I'm like, does the stone even get used? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think out of all of them, I think the Resurrection Stone is only mentioned in passing, and I only know about it because I remember reading about it in the books. Like, I don't remember actually like hearing that much about it in the movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to what I said earlier, I mean, I think a part of me wishes that J.K. Rowling would add more to the story, that we kind of see more of it introduced into the Potterverse, like we did with the Infinity Stones or the Rings of Power. But at the same time, I think the lack of information kind of helps it also, because it kind of keeps in that realm of mystery. So I definitely want to move on to the Rings of Power. And I was going to say, out of all of the villains, I think Sauron is the one I think it's safe to say we don't really feel too much sympathy for, because he's
evil incarnate.
Literally evil incarnate, if we're following the whole religious iconography that Tolkien's going with.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing with the rings. What I find interesting is the fact that you have you have all these different rings, and a certain number goes to the dwarves, a certain number goes to the elves, and a certain number goes to the men.
It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest, and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power.
But what's interesting is the fact that, depending on who you're giving it to, the powers are going to be a little bit different, right? Because the dwarves, they're more concerned about money, so it kind of like helps amplify their wanting to be rich, whereas the elves, it kind of speaks more to their need for longevity. And for men, I think it just caters to their fear of death and just wanting to cheat death, kind of piggybacking off the whole Deathly Hallows thing. So this is more of your wheelhouse. So I do want to talk about, what is it about the Rings of Power that has such a huge fascination with, both within and without the Lord of the Rings universe.
So one thing I do really like, and Christian kind of talked a little bit about it earlier, is there's something very interesting in the world of the Lord of the Rings, that it is going to sound a little weird at first. There's a TV show called The Legend of the Seeker that they have an episode where they talk about something, and I'm like, oh my God, that's exactly what it is in Lord of the Rings. And I just never quite put my finger on it, is the fact that you live in a very magical world. The fact that there are flying eagles that are huge, the fact that orcs exist, and the mumicles, like all of this stuff exists. It is clearly a magical world, but yeah, you don't have people walking around lobbing fireballs left and right like it's nothing. When people in that world see it, it's still unique. But it's cool to think of the idea of living in a magical world, but magic itself is still unique and powerful and something to be sought after. Not everyone in that world is capable of developing the powers of Gandalf. They're not able to become a wizard. But the fact that you've got this ring that has these magical powers in it that you can have access to, and all you have to do is put it on.
For another ring was made. In the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a master ring to control all others. And into this ring, he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life.
And bam, you've got some level of magic powers. I think that's one of the big draws of something like that. We talked earlier about the idea that so many magical artifacts we know of are pieces of jewelry and rings, necklaces, small stones, things that to get access to it, you just wear it, you put it on. It doesn't necessarily take 20 years of practice to be able to perform one spell. You just are the power as soon as you put it on.
Right. It's kind of like plug and play, really.
Yeah, that's a really good phrase to use for it. So yeah, I think that definitely has something to play with it. And then for the rings, you know, you've got the 9, 7, 3, and 1. 1 is sort of its own category because it is such a unique ring. But with the 9, you've got the idea that it was given to 9 men. I would say probably the most fragile of the beings that rings are given to. And it was supposed to give them more power. It was supposed to let them, I think, like see a bit into the world beyond, which is where when Frodo puts the ring on and he becomes invisible, what it is he's actually in like almost like a different plane of existence that's still within ours. That's why he can't.
Yeah, because you can see the Nazgul when they're chasing him.
Yeah. So there was the idea of when the 9 men were still men, they were able to see a bit into that. So it's supposed to make them more than. Some people have talked about the idea that the rings can take the power someone already has and kind of exemplify it and kind of crank it to 11. That's why whenever very small diminutive people like Gollum or a hobbit put on the ring, that's why they become invisible. They're already very small of stature, very easy to miss. The rings, you know, when I have, because I've read Lord of the Rings books, I've read the Silmarillion, when I have read into these, some of it, and when you look online, I think a lot of the powers of the rings, people have to interpret what they are, because there's not really a definitive, this is this ring, this is its name, this is what it does, these are the drawbacks, this is who it was given to. It doesn't really, it's kind of like you get the name of the ring. For the elven rings, you do get the elements that are tied to them, and then we know who has them at different times. But then when I was looking online, and I was like, a lot of people say this ring does this, and I'm like, where did you get that from? And they're like, well, that's what I think it is. So,
right, it's conjecture.
Yeah. So the dwarven rings in particular are the ones that when I was looking them up, a lot of people are talking about how the rings are supposed to help them gain wealth, and I'm like, that's cool. How? You know, it's the fact that their big thing is about gaining wealth. They are mining like crazy. I feel like they're gonna find it whether they have the rings or not.
Right.
Yeah, and then the 9 rings of men, the idea that it was supposed to help them live a lot longer. It was supposed to let them see into that kind of different realm. But then ultimately, they just become the Nazgul. I mean, they literally become the ring wraiths. They don't have to worry about death anymore because they can't die.
Exactly.
But then they're just become, you know, like I said, husks of what they used to be. They're slaves to Sauron. But then you do have the elven rings that a lot of their powers are about protection and maybe healing. The fact that in the Lord of the Rings main story that we know of, the 3 elven rings are in the possessions of Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf.
Mm-hmm.
And there are readings in the book where it talks about Elrond using the power of his ring to help protect Rivendell. But it doesn't necessarily say how. It just states that he uses the power of the ring. So then it kind of becomes a question of, is he maybe able to obscure the location of Rivendell? Are there maybe some type of magical barricades or something around Rivendell that we just don't know about? So it's another one of those things where they tell you that the power of the ring is protecting Rivendell, but they don't really just state this is how it happens.
Right. So it's kind of like, I guess the best way to say is sort of like saying they're showing but not telling. Really.
Yeah. That really is it. Is they have the idea of the rings have certain powers, certain abilities that it grants the wielder. Some of them do have detriments and side effects, but they just don't really. It's ironic. Have you read the Lord of the Rings books?
It was a long time ago, man, like a long time ago, but I am sort of familiar with it. Here's my thing. What I find, because to your point earlier about the ring's power being contingent to the person, what I find fascinating is the fact that but everybody seeks out these rings because they want the power.
Mhm.
But a part of me kind of wonders, like what kind of power were you imagining that you would get from the ring, right? Because if say for instance, if if you got one of the rings of men and you were expecting invisibility, but you really didn't get that, you just got longevity. Does that mean that you got what you wanted, or did you feel like it really didn't accomplish what you were intending for that ring to do? Because the power of the ring, we know that this ring can do this and this, but like I said earlier, I mean, a lot of the powers that manifest are pretty much depending on the wearer, really.
Yeah.
I'll also say too, because correct me if I'm wrong, the elven rings they were created separately. They weren't necessarily influenced by Sauron like the other rings.
One ring to rule them all.
Yeah, so if I am remembering correctly, what happened is the 3 elven rings were created, and then from there is when Sauron started his plan of, okay, I can make my own ring. I can make the rings of power. So the rings for men, the rings for dwarves. But yeah, the elven rings are, to the best of my knowledge, completely unrelated to Sauron's influence. I don't believe he ever gets his hands on any of them.
Because that's why Rivendell isn't attacked like Rohan or what's it? The name's blanking. What's that?
Gondor.
Gondor, yes, because like the realms of men and the dwarven realms, they kind of get overrun by evil, but Rivendell is kind of like safe and sound out in the forest or mountains. But what I also find fascinating too is the fact that out of all the rings, we really don't see that much of it used by the dwarves. Really,
no. When I was looking into the information about the dwarven rings, I think by the time we are seeing the story of Lord of the Rings, I think most of them, some of them got destroyed by dragons. I think Sauron himself had taken a few of them.
See, I was under the understanding that Sauron took them because he was playing the long game, and once the dwarves were gone, like he just went and took them. But I didn't entirely know for sure what happened.
Yes, here it was. So this was so according to this, now I looked up a few different things, and this is the best version I found, is that it was the 7 kindreds of dwarves. Each of them received 1 ring. And then Sauron was able to recover 3 of the 7 rings. 3 were seized from Thrain during his captivity. And then Gandalf, this says Gandalf recounts to Frodo that the remaining 4 were consumed by dragons. I'm not going to lie, I don't remember reading that. But if it was one of the times that in the books that Gandalf was talking to Frodo, he says a lot.
There's a lot of exposition,
yeah. And then it says that before the War of the Ring, Sauron sent an envoy to try to bribe Dane with the last 3 rings in exchange for information about the One Ring, but Dane did not give him anything. So, to the best of my knowledge of the Dwarven rings, there are 3 still remaining, but especially after the end of Sauron, after the destruction of the One Ring, I don't really know what happens to them. I don't know if they ever come back into the fold. I don't know of any prominent, because it is interesting that you've got 1, 3, 7, 9. The 9, we know who they went to. We know exactly what happened to them. They are prominent characters in the story of Lord of the Rings. The 3, we know information about them. Those are probably the ones that we know the most about. We know who has them. But then all the ones in the middle, all the dwarven ones, by the time of Lord of the Rings, they're just not really a player in the game. They're not there.
Well, that leads me to another question, because we know about about the One Ring of power, the One Ring to rule them all, in the darkness bind them. So my question is, like, is the One Ring powerful when you have, just like with the Infinity Stones? Is it powerful when you have all of the rings together under Sauron's control, or can it still function even when it's, like, I don't know, 50% charged, to use modern parlance?
So that is a good question. I was looking up some information about that, and there is definitely the line about "and in the darkness bind them, possession of the rings." But even by the time that happens, if some of the rings have been destroyed, does that make Sauron weaker? I couldn't really,
That's what I want to know, because
I couldn't really find anything that supported that. That certainly could be that could be a thing. I think it's hard to say, because when you think of Sauron's power, we only see him in like corporeal form, like in his definitive form. We really only see that like 1.5 times in Lord of the Rings.
yeah, and they're in flashbacks too. And this is like during the War of the Second Alliance of Men and Elves.
Yeah, so it's hard to say something about his power if you do like when he first arrives and he first starts growing power and has the one ring at maybe the height of his power versus the time of Lord of the Rings. It's hard to say where his power would be between the two.
Because the Second Age is like 1,000-year period anyway, between the time he has those rings and by the time you get to the Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah, I will say, for me, I've pretty much always thought of Sauron's power. It is really cool to think of him in that sick freaking giant plate armor with the giant mace, just taking people out by the droves. But I've really always thought of Sauron's power as the fact that he draws all like evil to him, and then that is his power. When they are talking about, oh, he's sending an army to Minas Tirith. Okay, how many troops does he have? The numbers that he has dwarf everything. I mean, This dude, he almost has a seemingly endless horde of not elves. That'd be
Orcs,
weird. Yeah, like orcs, men, trolls. I mean, goblins. It's just the fact that this like almost unlimited cesspit of evil. I've always thought like that is his power, in the fact that if you do not destroy that one ring and officially get rid of him, you are literally going to be battling his minions until the end of days. He will never run out of troops. He'll never run out of what he has.
But what about destroying Sauron himself? Because we see what happens at the end of the Return of the King, where Frodo drops it into Mount Doom, and then his essence gets dispersed or destroyed, however you want to phrase it, and then his army just turns and runs. So I mean, so to your point, like even if you destroy the ring, I mean, you would still have to deal with the fact that you have his minions out there. Really?
Yeah, and in the books there is a decent I guess almost like epilogue section where after the battle at Mount Doom, all of his people take off. There is a decent thing about the armies of men and elves, and I don't really think dwarves are mentioned in there, but they band together and then they basically just start hunting. They go after his minions and then they just start tearing them out root and stem from anywhere they are. So yeah, if you didn't know that, all the orcs at the end of Lord of the Rings, if you're like, oh, I'm sure they're going to be okay, they're not. They get super murdered not long after. So
yeah, basically they're victims of hit squads.
I mean, pretty much.
It's kind of like that movie Munich, where you're just going around hunting all these orcs down and just like blowing them up one by one.
I mean, pretty much. One thing I don't know if a lot of people know about is the movie doesn't really talk about it, but the amount of time that actually takes place in the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and Return of the King, it is years upon years upon years that this takes place. Right. So then by the time the Battle of Mount Doom ends and Sauron is defeated, it's not just an immediate happy ending. There are still a lot of things that have to be done. Various cities have to be rebuilt. There are still going to be goblins and orcs and trolls out there somewhere. But yeah, pretty much to my understanding, by the time the true end of Lord of the Rings happens, so Frodo has left for the Undying Lands, Sam sits down. By my understanding, by the time that officially happens, it is clean. It is a clean slate. Evil has been as wiped from the land as it possibly can be, and then we just go into the new realm of, or the new era of men, really.
Yeah. So, well, another thing too, because when I was watching the Lord of the Rings, my thing is that Sauron, I think out of all of the villains, I think Sauron doesn't, he needs the ring, but at the same time, it's not something that's gonna make his situation, any better or any worse, because he is, and correct me if I'm wrong, he's one of the Maiar, isn't he, or one of the Ainur?
Yeah.
So he's already at a power level that far exceeds, all the other denizens of Middle Earth anyway.
Yeah.
So so him having that one ring isn't so much about him, trying to jack himself up any further, because he's already powerful as it is, apart from having to deal with Eru Iluvatar. But it's more of the fact that he just wants it as a conduit to kind of spread his control and influence throughout Middle Earth. Well, and I'll modify that to say he wants to, control the people who aren't already under his thrall, like you said, the goblins and the orcs and the trolls.
Yeah, I also, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he has to have his ring to take physical form at this point. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure, because I love the idea of like the end of Lord of the Rings, just they have a little oopsie and he gets the ring and Aragorn's there like fighting like great, and you look up the mountain and you just see fucking Sauron like coming. So, oh my god, that'd be horrible. But yeah, I think he needs the ring to take his physical form back. Hard to say because
but it doesn't necessarily. But like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean like it increases his power levels, like we would see with Thanos, where
now that's true. Yeah, I don't believe that's the case. I think it's really just physical form, and then the idea of, oh my god, we have to find a way to beat this thing again. But yeah.
But I'll say this too. Like I think out of all the villains, I think Sauron's probably the most terrifying, is because of the fact that he doesn't exist for the most part, he doesn't exist in the form that we're all too familiar with, because like you said, we briefly see him that, giant, black armored form, but he's also taken all these different forms where he's the Lord of Light, where he's influencing Celebrimbor into making the rings form in the first place, and even then, like, he spends most of his time in non-corporeal form. So I think that's what makes it so terrifying, is at least with Thanos or Voldemort, you've got the guy right there. If you can hit him just hard enough, that's it. Whereas with Sauron, to your point, it's not so much defeating the person of Sauron, but defeating the idea of Sauron.
Yeah.
But the ring itself kind of helps the heroes kind of focus on a physical manifestation, because obviously, as physical beings, we need something physical in order to understand and comprehend what's going on here, right? So by having that ring, it kind of becomes the focal point for the heroes to figure out, if we can destroy the ring, i.e., we can destroy Sauron.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the. And I don't know if that's the feeling you got from watching the movies or reading the books, but that's what I got. It's like if they destroy the ring, then they get rid of Sauron, then Middle Earth can go back to being, a happy little place where elves are just, hanging out in Rivendell and all that stuff.
And it is really interesting between the three of them that we talked a little bit about earlier. Even without the Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos is a force to be reckoned with. I mean, this dude fist fights the Hulk like it's nothing. If you take away the Infinity Gauntlet, he is still Thanos. If you take away Thanos, if you took away his strength, his physical strength, he still has all of his armies. He still have all of his minions.
Right.
With Voldemort, even before he got the wand, the Elder Wand, I mean, this dude was still a force to be reckoned with. He still has all the Death Eaters. Sauron still has all of his armies, everything beyond whatever. But without the ring, he just can't take his physical form. So yeah, like you said, really, Voldemort, people can still fight him. Thanos, people can still fight him. Sauron, when he's on the battlefield, you're not really fighting him. You're just kind of surviving. I will say there was a deleted scene where they were going to have Aragorn actually fight the embodiment of Sauron. It's weird. They had two different deleted scenes with him fight. Well, he didn't really fight the mouth of Sauron. He just beheaded him.
Right.
It is a little interesting tidbit, though, is if you watch the theatrical version, he goes up to the gate. In a deleted scene, he beheads the mouth of Sauron, but then when he's given his speech, he still has the black blood on his sword in the theatrical version. So that means if you watch that version, you never saw him behead the mouth of Sauron, but all of a sudden he has black blood on his blade and no one questions it. But yeah, there was I think a deleted scene that I don't even think they ended up filming it, but I remember seeing it about him fighting Sauron's giant form. And I mean, he's doing a good job, but I just don't know. Oh, that's right. The troll. That's what it was. The troll that he ends up fighting that ends up like stepping on him and he stabs in the foot. That was originally supposed to be that's right. God, I was like, why do I know this? That was supposed to be Sauron.
Okay.
And I don't remember the reason anymore for changing it. I think it makes sense because if he was there in physical form, I would be one of the first people to question why hasn't he been here before? You know, why are we just now seeing him? But yeah, it is also kind of ironic that his greatest strength is his power is so tied to that ring. Yet at the same point in time, you destroy this one tiny thing, and this just giant lord of evil who has all of this power is gone.
Yeah, and that leads me to another question because did he put any of his essence in the ring? Because we know with Voldemort, he has like all these little Horcruxes where he puts bits of himself in them to kind of preserve his life. Did he do anything similar with the ring, or is it more just like him exerting his, the ring is being a conduit for exerting his will on men, dwarves, and elves?
No, you said it pretty much exactly. His essence is so poured into that ring that Gandalf mentions that he has poured so much of himself into the ring that he is now completely tied to this ring.
So what I said earlier about them kind of equating destroying the ring with destroying Sauron stands true then.
Oh yeah. As soon as they destroy that, I would be interested to know that if he had a physical form and they destroyed the ring, if that still would have destroyed the physical form. I'm a little interested if that was the case. Obviously that's not something we would know because he didn't end up taking physical form again.
Right.
But yeah, once they destroy the ring and the tower crumbles, I mean Sauron is gone. He is a thing of the past. He was so deeply tied to that ring. So much of his essence was in it that when they destroyed it, he's just gone.
Well, another thing too is because when Gollum gets his hands on the One Ring and he kind of degrades over time, you sort of see like it. I almost want to say it's kind of like possession, really, because you could sort of see a bit of Sauron possessing Gollum and sort of turning him into something similar to who he is or to the creatures that he controls, right? Yeah. Because when you first meet Gollum, he's not too different from the orcs or the Uruk-hai or the trolls or anything like that, and you would think, oh, he's just a denizen of Mordor. He just tell him to fuck off, and I'll just keep going my own little way. But it's just so telling the fact that when when anyone puts on this ring, they sort of become an embodiment of who Sauron is, which is a very disturbing prospect because it's so cleverly written, the fact that these rings kind of cater to our innermost desires, but at the same time it kind of warps the wearer into a facsimile of the creator, of the person who kind of wields that ring. So it totally makes sense that that the Nine Lords of Men would end up becoming the Nazgul, and the Witch King of Angmar, who used to be a very prominent king, would become, basically, Sauron Jr., just based on the way that he looks,
Yeah, and when we were talking about Sauron being the embodiment of evil, it is so interesting that those rings, you get to see the physical version of, if you take a king, a king's just the manliest man, and you pour evil into him, this is what he becomes. If you take what Smeagol was, the very Hobbiton-like person, and you just pour evil into it, you see the physical manifestation of what that becomes.
Right.
And it is really interesting to see those, that you get to see 100% that if Sauron's evil, if just pure evil and malice is poured into, in one case, I would say a fairly innocent, normal person versus a fucking king of men. Like, he was not just a person. This was like the best of us. And to see what it still turned him into.
Yeah, it's just like with Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, where he goes from being a man who everybody looks up to sort of this crazy, half-faced person who's going around murdering people.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but I do want to go ahead and start bringing it to a close. So we discussed the Infinity Gauntlet. We discussed the Deathly Hallows, and we've just wrapped up our discussion of the Rings of Power. Christian already gave his take about what he would walk away with. Bradley, if someone approached to you and said, you can either have the Gauntlet, the Rings of Power, or the Deathly Hallows, what would you go with?
Gauntlet. It's Gauntlet, and it's the Reality Stone, man. It is the freaking Reality Stone, because it is a good point that it doesn't just like affect reality, it can create reality. It's the fact that it can literally, it's just like playing the world on cheat codes at that point.
Yeah.
It would be, I do think that would be really cool. The Hallows, I don't think that I really have much of an interest in. I mean, the invisibility cloak would be fun to mess with people with,
Right.
but and then the rings, kind of like what we've said is, I think some of the latent powers in them would be cool, but compared to the Infinity Gauntlet, the Infinity Gauntlet is just much more prominent, much more control over various aspects of things. That it's hard to imagine anything I would take over that.
Well, also too, because if you think about it, I mean, the powers of the Infinity Gauntlet are truly cosmic, whereas compared to the Deathly Hallows and the Rings of Power, they're very much localized, right?
Yeah.
I mean, with the Rings of Power, it's very much inherent to the world of Middle Earth, just like with the Deathly Hallows, it's. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's pertinent to the Wizarding world. It's just pertinent to whatever you've got going on in your life, really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm agreeing with you, but I'm going to say the Infinity Gauntlet.
I was literally about to ask which one you would take.
I mean, now that being said, I wouldn't use it. I would just have it sitting there. It's kind of like having nuclear missiles. It's like if everybody knows you have it, they know they're not going to mess with you.
That's fair.
It's like as long as they see it, they're like, okay, I know I'm not to mess with this guy. We're good. But brother, I just want to thank you for taking time out of your day to come on this panel discussion. I really do appreciate that, and I'm really happy to see you back again, man. It's been a long time, and we got to do this more often.
We do. This has been a lot of fun. I just recorded an episode of my podcast last night.
Okay.
And there were a lot of things where I was like, oh my God, we just talked about this. Oh my God, we just talked about that. Oh my God, we just talked about that. But it is nice to come on here with a few other people as well.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, definitely reach out to Christian because he's a great guy to chat with, and he's very knowledgeable. And yeah, I mean, he could probably definitely help you out with your podcast as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for taking time to watch Myth, Magic, and Movies, and let us know down in the comments below which item would you go with: Infinity Gauntlet, Rings of Power, or the Deathly Hallows. And we'll be back next month with another episode where we'll be taking a look at which movie best represents Dracula. And as always, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.